The wind was sharp that evening as Sarah drove along the quiet Colorado highway, trying to beat the storm that was rolling in. The clouds were heavy, the sky turning from soft gray to dark blue, and the road stretched endlessly ahead. Ethan sat in the passenger seat, his phone resting on his knee, glancing outside now and then but mostly lost in his thoughts. They had just left the small town where they'd attended his father's memorial service. It had been a long, painful day, full of faces they hadn't seen in years, and words they'd struggled to say. Sarah's hands tightened on the steering wheel as the rain began to fall. Slow drops first, then harder. The wipers squeaked back and forth. Struggling to keep up, she glanced at Ethan, noticing how quiet he was. He had his father's eyes, gentle but thoughtful, and every time she saw that, her heart ached. She had been married to his father for 10 years, and though they had always been close, things between her and Ethan had changed since the funeral. Not in words, but in the silence that filled every small moment. A faint rattling sound came from under the hood. Sarah frowned. "Do you hear that?" she asked, turning down the radio. Ethan leaned forward, listening. "Yeah, it doesn't sound good," he said, a crease forming between his brows. Before she could respond, the car gave a sudden jolt. Then another. The headlights dimmed, and the engine coughed once before going completely still. The car rolled to the side of the empty road and stopped. The sound of rain grew louder, echoing on the metal roof. Sarah tried the ignition again, but the engine refused to start. The dashboard lights flickered weakly, then went dark. "No, no, no," she muttered under her breath. Hitting the steering wheel softly, Ethan sighed, pulling out his phone. "Let me check for signal," he said, holding it up toward the windshield. "1 bar maybe," he muttered, turning it slowly. He tried calling roadside assistance, but the call dropped twice before finally going through. "It'll take a few hours for a tow truck to reach us," he said finally. "They're sending someone in the morning." Sarah looked out the window, the rain now falling in sheets. "Morning?" she asked, exhausted. "We can't stay out here all night." Ethan nodded. "Yeah, there's a motel a few miles back. I saw the sign earlier." He glanced at her. "We can walk or try to get a ride." They both stepped out into the rain. Pulling up their jackets, the air was freezing, and the wet gravel crunched beneath their shoes. After walking for a few minutes, headlights appeared behind them. A pickup truck slowed down, and the driver, an older man with a kind face, offered them a ride to the motel. The road felt endless as they drove through the storm, but eventually, the faint glow of a neon sign appeared through the rain. The sign read Pinewood Motel, its red light flickering weakly. The building was small and old but stood steady against the weather. The man dropped them off, wishing them luck, and drove off into the night. Sarah and Ethan hurried inside, shaking off the rain. The lobby smelled faintly of pine cleaner and coffee. A small bell sat on the counter, and behind it was a woman in her 60s reading a magazine. She looked up, her glasses slipping down her nose. "Evening. We're stranded," Sarah explained. "Our car broke down a few miles up the road." The woman nodded sympathetically. "You're lucky we've got a room left." "Storm's been rough tonight," she said, flipping open the logbook. "1 room. 2 beds," she added, glancing up. Sarah exhaled with relief. "That'll be fine," she said quickly. She signed the paper, took the key, and thanked the woman before turning toward Ethan, who gave her a small, tired smile. They walked down the narrow hallway, the carpet old but clean. The lights hummed softly, and rain pattered against the roof. When they reached their room, Sarah unlocked the door. The room was small but warm. A lamp glowing in the corner. Two beds stood side by side. Covered with simple floral blankets, a small heater hummed quietly near the wall. Sarah placed her bag down, running a hand through her damp hair. "Well, it's not fancy," she said. Trying to sound lighter, Ethan smiled faintly. "It's better than the car," he replied. He walked to the window, watching the rain blur the parking lot lights. His reflection looked older somehow. Tired but thoughtful, Sarah sat on the edge of one bed, feeling the day finally catch up to her. The silence in the room felt different, softer, quieter. It wasn't the silence of distance, but of two people who didn't know what to say after everything they'd been through. She looked over at Ethan, who was scrolling on his phone, probably trying to reach a mechanic or check the weather. "You okay?" she asked. He looked up, surprised. "Yeah, I'm fine, just tired," he said. "You?" She nodded slowly. "It's been a long day," she said, her voice low. "I keep thinking about him." Ethan's expression softened. "Me too," he said quietly. "It's weird. I thought after the service I'd feel some kind of peace. But it just feels empty." Sarah looked down, fiddling with the hem of her sleeve. "It does," she whispered. "He always handled everything, and now it's just quiet." The heater clicked louder for a moment, filling the space between their words. Outside, thunder rolled gently, the sound distant but steady. Sarah looked toward the window again, the rain painting thin lines down the glass. "Do you think he'd be proud of us?" she asked after a long pause. Ethan turned, his eyes soft. "Yeah," he said without hesitation. "He'd say we did our best." For a moment, their eyes met, and in that quiet look, there was something warm, an unspoken bond built from shared loss and long memories. Ethan gave a small smile, the kind that carried both comfort and sadness. Sarah returned it, her chest tightening in a way she didn't expect. She stood up, brushing her hands together. "I'll get some towels from the bathroom," she said quickly. Needing a breath, in the small mirror above the sink, she caught a glimpse of her self-tired eyes. Hair a little messy, grief still lingering in every line of her face. But beneath that, she saw strength, something she hadn't recognized in a while. When she came back, Ethan was sitting on the bed, still watching the rain. "They say the storm should clear by morning," he said softly. "We'll get the car fixed and head home." "Home," Sarah repeated, the word feeling strange. The house felt emptier now, too quiet without her husband's laughter, and she wondered how she would fill that space. She sat down again, and they both sat there for a while, listening to the rain and the hum of the heater. Neither said much, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that didn't need to be fixed. As the clock ticked toward midnight, the storm outside grew heavier, thunder echoing across the dark hills. Sarah got up and closed the curtains, then turned off the lamp. The room sank into a calm, golden dimness. Ethan stretched out on his bed, pulling the blanket over him. "Good night," he said quietly. "Good night, Ethan," she replied, but sleep didn't come easily. Sarah lay awake, listening to the rain, her thoughts drifting back and forth between the past and the present. She remembered her husband's smile, the way he'd look at both of them across the dinner table, proud and content. Now, here she was, beside the only other person who understood that loss as deeply as she did. She turned slightly, looking toward Ethan's bed, his breathing slow and steady. He looked peaceful, and for a moment, she felt a strange sense of safety. The world outside was chaotic, but here, in this small room, there was warmth. There was comfort in knowing she wasn't alone. As the rain softened and the night grew still, Sarah finally let her eyes close. Somewhere in the darkness between dreams and memory, she thought she heard her husband's voice, soft and distant, saying everything would be all right. And for the first time in months, she believed it. Outside, the storm continued, quiet but constant. A broken car, a shared night, and a silence filled with things neither of them could name yet. But sometimes, she thought, maybe that's how healing begins, not with words, but with the quiet understanding that even in broken moments, you're not alone. The heater hummed one last time before settling into a steady rhythm, and the rain whispered against the window until morning. The night had started with trouble, but somehow, it didn't feel like an ending anymore. It felt like the start of something new, something neither of them could yet explain, but both could feel, deep and real, beneath the sound of the rain. The night settled in deeper, as the rain continued to fall outside. The sound soft but steady. Sarah woke briefly when the wind pushed against the window, a low moan echoing through the room. She turned on her side, watching the dim light from the street lamp flicker through the curtains. Ethan was still awake, sitting up against the headboard with a book in his hand. His face was calm but distant, his thoughts clearly somewhere else. "You can't sleep either?" she asked quietly, her voice just above a whisper. He looked up, shaking his head. "Not really, just thinking." Sarah pushed herself up, leaning against her pillow. "About your dad?" she asked gently. Ethan nodded, closing the book. "Yeah, I keep replaying things I said. And things I didn't," he said, his tone soft. "It's strange. You think you'll have time to say everything, but you don't." Sarah's chest tightened. She knew that feeling too well. "I still find myself expecting him to walk through the door," she said. "Even now, after everything." Ethan gave a small, understanding smile. "He had that kind of presence," he said. "Like the world stopped when he walked in." Sarah laughed quietly. "He did, didn't he?" she said, and for a second, the heaviness lifted, replaced by warmth and shared memory. The heater rattled softly in the corner, filling the silence that followed. Outside, the rain was heavier now, the drops clinging to the glass and rolling down like tears. Sarah watched them for a while, feeling something fragile inside her ease. "Do you want coffee?" Ethan asked, breaking the quiet. He got up and went to the small counter where a cheap coffee machine sat. He filled 2 cups, the smell of roasted beans spreading through the room. He handed one to her, their fingers brushing for a second, a small, natural touch that neither of them mentioned. They sat together, sipping the hot coffee. "This reminds me of when we used to visit the cabin," Ethan said after a while. "Dad would make coffee at 5 in the morning and wake everyone up just to watch the sunrise." Sarah smiled, her eyes soft. "He said it was the best way to start a day," she said. "Even when we were freezing," Ethan laughed quietly. "Yeah. And he'd burn the toast every time." The memory drew a small laugh from both of them, the kind that eased the pain for just a moment. They looked at each other and smiled, not because it was funny, but because remembering him together made it hurt a little less. The air between them grew calm, filled with that quiet comfort that comes from being understood. After a while, Sarah stood and pulled the extra blanket from the closet. "You should try to rest," she said. "We'll have to deal with the car early." Ethan nodded but didn't move. He was watching the rain again, lost in his thoughts. "You ever wonder why people leave so suddenly?" he said softly. "Like, what's the point of all this if it can end in a moment?" Sarah looked at him, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I wonder that too," she said. "But maybe it's not about how long they stay. Maybe it's about what they leave with us." She paused. "Your dad left a lot of himself in you, Ethan." He turned toward her. a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "You think so?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "Every time you talk about him, I see him in you, the way you care, the way you think." He looked down, quiet for a moment. "He always said you were the strongest person he knew." Sarah blinked, her throat tightening. "He said that?" She asked softly. "Yeah," Ethan said. "He said you made him feel safe, that you could find light even in dark places." The room went still for a moment, the sound of rain filling the space like soft music. Sarah looked away, her heart full and aching. "He always made me believe I could," she said. "But after he was gone, I didn't know how anymore." Ethan leaned forward a little, his voice gentle. "You still do, Sarah. You got us here. You've been holding everything together." Something in his words reached her deeply, like a reminder she didn't know she needed. She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means more than you think." For a long while, they just sat in silence, the clock ticking softly on the knitstand. It wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. The air was heavy with memory and unspoken emotion, but it didn't hurt as much now. Ethan finally lay down, one arm behind his head. "You should get some rest too," he said. She nodded and turned off the lamp, letting the room sink into soft darkness. Minutes passed, maybe hours. The storm outside rising and falling. Sarah lay awake again, her mind full of everything unsaid. Grief had a strange way of pulling people together, of stripping away small talk and leaving only truth. She turned slightly, seeing Ethan's outline in the dim light. Still awake, eyes open, watching the ceiling. "You miss him every day, don't you?" she asked quietly. Ethan's voice came back softly. "Yeah, every single day," he said. "But tonight doesn't feel as heavy." "Maybe because we're not trying to carry it alone," Sarah said, her words barely a whisper. Ethan looked toward her, his expression soft. "Yeah, maybe that's it." The room felt smaller now, but not in a bad way. The warmth from the heater filled every corner, and the storm outside seemed far away. Sarah felt calm for the first time in months. She didn't know if it was the coffee, the company, or the way Ethan spoke with quiet kindness, but it made her heart settle. At some point, lightning flashed outside, lighting the room for a second. Ethan got up and checked the window, closing it tighter. "It's really pouring now," he said. Sarah nodded. "It's fine. It's just one night," she murmured. He turned back to her and smiled. "Yeah, just one night," he said. But somehow, both of them knew this night felt different. He sat back down on his bed, and for a moment, neither looked away. There was no awkwardness, no guilt, just the strange comfort of being understood completely. Sarah finally lay back down, pulling the blanket up. "We should try to sleep before morning," she said softly. "You're right," he replied. "Good night." "Good night, Ethan." But even as the room fell quiet again, neither of them slept right away. The rain softened, the thunder drifted farther away, and the heater's hum became the only sound left. Sarah stared at the ceiling, her thoughts tangled between the past and present, remembering laughter, small dinners, and Sunday mornings that felt a lifetime away. She thought about how grief had built walls between them, how both had been too careful around each other, afraid to say the wrong thing. But tonight, those walls had quietly fallen, replaced by a simple, human closeness that didn't need explanation. Hours passed like minutes, and slowly, the first hint of calm settled over them. Sarah's eyes grew heavy, her heartbeat steady again. She turned one last time toward Ethan, his face peaceful now. Finally asleep in the dim light, he looked younger, more like the boy she'd watched grow up, and less like the man burdened by loss. A soft smile touched her lips, not of happiness, but of peace. For the first time in so long, she didn't feel alone. The rain outside slowed to a gentle drizzle. The clouds drifting away. The night had started heavy with grief. But now it carried something else: understanding, forgiveness, and the quiet beginning of healing. Sarah finally drifted into sleep, the sound of the rain like a lullaby. And somewhere in her dreams, she saw her husband again, smiling the way he used to. Not sad or distant, but proud, content, as if he knew they were both going to be all right. When the clock on the wall ticked past 3 in the morning, the storm finally faded completely. The air was still, the world quiet. The room that had felt temporary now held the weight of something deeper. A moment of change. A night that had begun in sorrow, but was slowly turning into light. Sometimes, life pauses in the most unexpected places. On dark roads and rainy nights. To remind us that even in loss there can be connection. And in silence there can be healing. Sarah didn't know it yet. That this night would stay with her forever. Not as a memory of pain, but as the moment she finally started to breathe again. As dawn began to touch the edges of the horizon, the rain stopped completely. The air smelled clean. The sky slowly turning from black to pale grey. Ethan stirred slightly, murmuring something in his sleep. And Sarah, half awake, whispered softly to the room, "We're going to be okay." The storm had taken their car, their plans, their sense of control, but in return, it had given them something more: a quiet night that healed old wounds. A night that began with heartbreak but ended with hope. And as the world outside turned to mourning, that hope grew quietly in both their hearts, waiting for the light to arrive. The first light of morning crept through the thin curtains. Soft and golden, Sarah opened her eyes slowly, for a moment forgetting where she was. The room smelled faintly of rain and coffee, the air cool but gentle after the storm. For a few seconds she just lay still, listening to the quiet hum of the heater and the distant sound of cars passing on the wet road outside. Then she turned her head and saw Ethan sitting near the window, still in his t-shirt, holding a steaming cup of coffee, watching the sky brighten. He noticed her awake and smiled softly. "Morning," he said, his voice low, calm. She sat up. "Stretching a little." "Morning," she replied, brushing her hair away from her face. "How long have you been up?" "A while," he said. "Couldn't sleep much after the rain stopped." He looked peaceful, but there was something thoughtful in his expression, the kind that comes after a night of heavy thinking. Sarah got out of bed, wrapped her sweater around her shoulders, and joined him by the window outside. The parking lot glistened with puddles, and the mountains beyond were wrapped in thin fog. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, feels like a new day," he said, handing her the extra cup of coffee. She smiled, their fingers brushing again. Small and natural. "Thank you," she said, taking a sip. The warmth spread through her chest, easing the weight that had lived there for months. For a moment they stood in silence, watching the sun peek through the clouds. It painted the wet asphalt with light and turned the raindrops on the glass into tiny sparks. Sarah breathed in deeply. "It's strange," she said after a while. "Everything feels quiet today. Peaceful?" Ethan asked. She nodded. "Yes, peaceful." There was a calm between them, something unspoken but real. Last night had opened something. Not in words, but in the way they understood each other now. They had both carried their grief alone, trying to stay strong, but in that one night, with the rain outside and the silence between them, something had changed. Ethan finished his coffee and set the cup down. "The tow truck's here," he said. Looking toward the parking lot, a white truck had pulled in. A man in a blue jacket stepping out. Sarah nodded. That was fast, she said. Guess it's time to get going. She moved around the room quickly, gathering her things, folding the blanket. Checking the bathroom, Ethan helped, quietly, smoothly. Neither saying much, but both moving in sync. When everything was ready, Sarah stopped for a second and looked around the small room. It wasn't much a single lamp, faded curtains. 2 beds, but somehow it felt like a place that had mattered. A space where something heavy had shifted inside her. You okay? Ethan asked. She turned to him, smiling faintly. Yeah, she said. Just thinking how strange life is, one night in a small hotel. And it feels like everything's a little different. He nodded. Yeah, I know what you mean, he said. Opening the door for her, the morning air was crisp and cool. The scent of wet earth everywhere. They walked to the car where the tow truck driver was already working, hooking up the broken vehicle. Morning, he greeted them cheerfully. Got your call. Figured you'd want to get moving before the next storm rolls in. We appreciate it, Sarah said with a smile while the driver worked. Ethan stood beside her, hands in his pockets. You know, he said after a moment, I was thinking about what you said last night. She looked at him curiously. About what? About how maybe it's not about how long someone stays, but what they leave behind, he said. I think you're right. Dad left a lot. And maybe it's our job to keep it alive. Sarah's eyes softened. That's a beautiful way to put it, she said. He'd be proud of you, Ethan. He looked down, smiling. I just try to do what he'd do. You do, she said gently. Every day. There was warmth in her voice, steady and full of quiet affection. She hadn't realized until now how much she'd needed to hear her own words out loud. To remind herself that love doesn't disappear just because someone's gone. It changes, it grows, it finds new places to live. The car was ready soon, the driver waving to them. You're all set, he said. Should run fine now. Just don't push her too hard today. Sarah thanked him and handed him the payment. The man tipped his hat and drove off, leaving them standing beside the repaired car. The road stretched out before them, clean and bright, lined with tall pines dripping from the storm. Ethan opened the passenger door for her. Ready? He asked. As ready as I'll ever be, she said with a soft laugh. She got in, and he closed the door gently, walking around to take the driver's seat this time. As they pulled onto the road, the tires splashed lightly through shallow puddles. The world felt new again, like they were starting fresh. The drive was quiet at first, the radio low, playing a soft old song that used to play in their kitchen on Sunday mornings. Sarah smiled faintly when she recognized it. Ethan noticed and smiled too. He loved this song, he said. He used to dance around while cooking breakfast. Sarah laughed softly. Badly, she said. He couldn't dance to save his life. Ethan chuckled. Yeah, but he tried. The laughter filled the car. Light and easy, something that had been missing for too long. The tension that had once filled every drive. Every conversation was gone, replaced by comfort. The road ahead curved along the mountains, sunlight flashing across their faces. After a while, Ethan spoke again. I was thinking, maybe we could fix up the cabin next summer. Sarah turned to him, surprised. The one by the lake? Yeah, he said. It's been sitting empty since. He didn't finish, but she knew what he meant. We could paint, clean it up, maybe spend a weekend there. She thought about it for a moment. The idea filling her with something she hadn't felt in a while. Hope. I'd like that, she said softly. It would be good to go back. They drove in silence for a few more miles. The sun now fully up, turning the sky a soft gold. Sarah leaned her head against the seat, Feeling calm, the grief was still there. It always would be, but it didn't feel so heavy now. She realized that healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant learning to live with the love that remained. Ethan glanced at her and smiled. "You look peaceful," he said. "I am," she replied. "For the first time in a long time." He nodded. "You deserve that." She looked out the window, the landscape opening wide before them. Trees swaying, birds flying low over wet fields. And she whispered, mostly to herself, "We both do," as they neared the town. Sarah felt the weight of everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. They had broken down in the middle of nowhere. But somehow, that breakdown had become the start of something new. It had forced them to stop, to talk, to feel, and to finally understand each other beyond grief. When they reached a small diner on the edge of town, Ethan pulled over. "Let's get breakfast," he said. "My treat," Sarah laughed. "After last night. I think you've earned it." They stepped out, the bell above the door jingling as they entered. The smell of pancakes and coffee filled the air. The waitress greeted them with a warm smile, and they sat by the window, sunlight spilling across the table. As they ate, they talked about little things, work, friends, plans for the week. It felt normal, and that normal felt precious. Sarah realized she hadn't laughed this easily in months. Watching Ethan talk, animated and bright again, she saw not just her husband's son, but a young man finding his way. After breakfast, they got back on the road. Heading toward home, the highway stretched long and empty, the sky wide and clear. Sarah rested her hand on the window, feeling the warmth of the sun. "You know," she said after a while, "I think maybe some things break down so that something better can begin." Ethan glanced at her, thoughtful. "Like the car?" She smiled. "Exactly like the car." They both laughed, the sound light and full of life, and for a moment, the grief that had followed them since the funeral felt miles behind. The road stretched out endlessly ahead, and Sarah felt something deep inside her shift from sorrow to gratitude. As the mountains faded in the distance, she looked over at Ethan, who was humming softly to the radio, and she thought of her husband again, of his laughter, his kindness, his love that had bound them together even after he was gone. She whispered quietly under her breath, "We're doing okay, love." The car moved steadily down the open road, sunlight glinting off the hood. The world felt wide, full of new chances. And though neither of them said it, they both knew this trip, this unexpected night, this quiet morning had changed something forever. Sometimes life pauses not to test us, but to remind us that even after loss, love doesn't disappear. It finds new ways to stay. And as they drove toward home, with the road stretching clear ahead, and the sky open above them, Sarah knew one truth with all her heart sometimes. The hardest nights lead to the most peaceful mornings, and sometimes a broken road can lead you exactly where you need to be.